Mr. Pemberton, can we talk with you for a minute about some missing mail?
Missing mail? On this route?
Gus Pemberton operated without oversight for 17 years as a rural mail carrier in Holland County, Georgia. More than 200 of his own customers depended on him. Not one person checked.
We've had several benefit checks reported missing from addresses you cover.
People call about checks all the time around here.
He had spent 17 years learning every mailbox on that route, every storm door, every elderly customer who waved from the porch when the LLV came around the bend. The federal agent standing in his driveway had spent the last 11 months learning the same route. 200 stolen checks, $940,000, and a folder in his garage with a handwritten list categorizing his own customers by which federal benefit they were waiting on. The retired veteran whose missing check started this investigation was on that list. Next to his name was a single letter. Before we go any further, I have to ask, how well do you actually know the people who walk onto your property every single day? Your mail carrier, your delivery driver, the person with a key to your apartment building's package room. Drop your thoughts below, and if you're not subscribed, hit that button now. We hold trusted positions accountable every single week on this channel. Gus Pemberton was born in 1975 in a stretch of Holland County, Georgia, where most families had been there for 4 generations. His father, Roy Pemberton, worked a tobacco farm in the summer and pulled wrenches at a small engine repair shop in the winter. His mother, Loretta, kept the books for a feed store on the county road. They lived in a single-story brick house off State Route 121, 3 miles outside the nearest town of any size. Gus was the middle child of 3. His older sister Brenda would become a hairdresser. His younger brother Wade would join the Marines and not come home from a motorcycle wreck outside Camp Lejeune in 1998. By the time Gus was 10 years old, he was already doing route work for his father, riding shotgun in the F-150, while Roy drove out to deliver rebuilt carburetors to farmers who could not get to town. Roy taught him the geography of the county the way old men teach their sons the names of cousins. Every dirt road, every creek crossing, every house with a mean dog, and every house where the woman who answered the door would offer you sweet tea no matter what time of day it was. Holland County, Roy told him, was a place where everybody knew everybody. The thing you did not understand until you were grown was how dangerous that could be. Gus graduated from Holland County High School in 1993. He was an average student. The yearbook photo shows a thin boy with hair cut short over the ears, a slight forward lean, and a closed-mouth smile. His teachers remembered him as polite and quiet. The football coach remembered him as a third-string defensive end who never missed a practice and never started a game. He worked summers at a sawmill outside Soperton, then spent 4 years with the Georgia Army National Guard, a Sunday soldier obligation that gave him a small paycheck and a sense of being part of something. He met Cheryl May Avery at a fall festival in 1996. She was 19, he was 21. They married 18 months later in the fellowship hall of her grandmother's small Pentecostal congregation. Their first daughter, Haley, was born in 2000. Their second, Marley, came in 2003. For the first 10 years of his marriage, Gus worked a series of jobs that paid by the hour. He drove a propane delivery truck. He worked at a poultry processing plant in Dublin. He spent 2 winters laying pipe for a county utility contractor. The pay was never enough. Cheryl worked part-time as a school cafeteria aide. They kept a household budget written in pencil in a spiral notebook Cheryl kept in the kitchen drawer. In late 2006, Gus applied to the United States Postal Service. His acceptance letter arrived in February of 2007. He was 32 years old. He went through carrier training at a regional facility in Macon, and in May of that year, he was assigned to a rural route running out of the Holland County Post Office on Magnolia Street. The starting salary was $38,000 a year, with federal benefits, a pension, and the kind of long-term security his father had never known. His first performance review described him as consistently reliable and demonstrating strong familiarity with route geography. His second called him exceptionally well-suited to rural delivery work. Within 3 years, he was the carrier customers asked for by name when they called the post office to complain about substitutes. The older residents on his route knew when his LLV would round the bend at the top of the rise. They timed their porch coffee to it. He brought packages to the door when the weather was bad. He noticed when a porch light had been left on for 2 days in a row, and called the sheriff's office once when a widow on Persimmon Lane did not pick up her mail for 3 days. The sheriff found her on the kitchen floor, alive but dehydrated. The county newspaper ran a small article. The headline called Gus a hero. That is who he was for the first 13 years of his career. A man whose route was his community, and whose community was his route. That trust was about to be tested in ways no one on Magnolia Street would see coming. The United States Postal Service runs more than 70,000 rural delivery routes across the country. A rural carrier is responsible not just for delivering mail, but for collecting it. On rural routes, there is no separate pickup driver. The carrier is the entire chain of human custody between a customer's mailbox and the regional processing facility where outgoing mail is sorted and dispatched. The model relies on something the federal government rarely names out loud. It relies on trust. The customer places an envelope in their roadside mailbox and raises the small red flag on the side. The carrier sees the flag, pulls up alongside the box, and transfers the envelope into the outgoing mail bin in the back of the LLV. That envelope might contain a paid utility bill with a personal check inside. It might contain a notarized signature on a deed transfer. It might contain a birthday card with $200 cash from a grandmother to a grandson she has not seen in 6 months. The carrier is the only human being who touches it between the mailbox and the processing facility 40 miles away. On a rural route in a county like Holland, the volume of outgoing mail is small enough that the carrier knows what most envelopes are without opening them. He recognizes the return address envelopes of the local utilities. He recognizes the cream-colored envelopes the IRS sends. He recognizes the patterns of when paper form federal benefit checks arrive and when they leave. Social Security pays out on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Wednesdays of each month, plus the 3rd of the month for older claimants. VA disability checks issue on the first business day of each month. Tax refund windows cluster between February and April. A carrier with 17 years on the same route does not have to think about these dates. They are built into his calendar the way fishing seasons are built into a charter captain's. Gus Pemberton's route covered approximately 480 households spread across 38 miles of rural Holland County. The route included 2 unincorporated communities, a stretch of paved county road with houses every quarter mile, and a network of dirt and gravel side roads ending in single-family farms. The Postal Service categorized his route as a higher-than-average concentration of older residents. By 2019, well over half of the households on his route had at least one resident over 65. A meaningful percentage received paper-form federal benefit checks rather than direct deposit. Many were widows, widowers, or elderly couples whose adult children lived 2 or 3 states away. The Postal Service's internal controls on this kind of arrangement are limited by design. A rural carrier is supervised through productivity metrics and customer complaints, not through real-time observation. There is no second pair of eyes on outgoing mail pickup. There is no audit of which envelopes a carrier collected from which mailbox. Internal affairs investigation, when it happens, is reactive. It begins after the complaints have already piled up. And in a community where the average customer is 78 years old and has been hearing the same LLV pull up to the same mailbox for the better part of 2 decades, complaints do not pile up quickly. They accumulate one missing check at a time, and they are absorbed one phone call at a time by a local post office that has been told for 30 years to reassure the customer and trace the mail. That was the system. That was the gap. Therefore, a carrier who understood the gap and was willing to use it could operate for a long time before anyone in the chain caught up with him. The first envelope Gus Pemberton stole was a tax refund check made out to a 68-year-old widow on the eastern half of his route. The date was March of 2020. The country was 3 weeks into the COVID-19 shutdown. Cheryl had been furloughed from her cafeteria job. Haley, their older daughter, had just told her parents she was pregnant by a boyfriend who had already moved out of state. Marley was in her senior year of high school, with college acceptance letters arriving in the mail Gus delivered to his own mailbox. Investigators would later say they could not establish a single triggering event. They could only establish a pattern. The first theft was small. The second theft followed within 10 days. By the end of April 2020, Gus had pocketed 4 envelopes from his outgoing mail handling. 2 were tax refunds. 1 was a paid utility bill containing a personal check from an elderly customer. 1 was a benefit check redirection that the customer had endorsed and was attempting to forward to a daughter for safekeeping. The method was simple. On rural routes, the carrier transfers outgoing mail from the customer's mailbox into the LLV's interior bin without any oversight. Pemberton began identifying outgoing envelopes likely to contain checks based on physical characteristics. Window envelopes from regional utilities, IRS-marked correspondence, recognizable bank envelopes with the small printed logos of local credit unions. He removed those envelopes from the outgoing bin before he returned to the post office. He stored them in a black canvas tool bag he kept on the passenger seat. At the end of his shift, the bag went home with him. For incoming mail, the method was different, but equally simple. During federal payment issuance windows, Pemberton selectively removed envelopes addressed to specific recipients on his route. He had a printed list of every household on his route. The Postal Service provides this list to all carriers as a standard operational document. But on Pemberton's copy of that list, besides specific addresses, he had begun writing small handwritten annotations. The letters V and A beside the addresses of veterans receiving disability checks. The letters S, S, and A beside Social Security recipients. The letters R and R beside railroad retirees. And beside a smaller subset of names, a single letter A. That letter stood for a loan. It identified customers Pemberton had determined, through years of personal familiarity, were unlikely to have family members who would follow through aggressively on a complaint about a missing check. The stolen checks moved through a small network of co-conspirators. The lead figure was a man named Devin Maxwell, age 41, who operated out of a single wide trailer on the outskirts of Lyons, Georgia. Maxwell specialized in check washing, a chemical process in which the ink used for payee names and dollar amounts is dissolved using a solvent solution, leaving the signature and routing information intact. The washed checks were then reissued with new payee names corresponding to fraudulent identity documents Maxwell maintained for the purpose. Pemberton received a cut. Maxwell took the larger share. A third figure, a woman named Charlene Bevins, handled the deposits into accounts opened under the fraudulent identities at small credit unions across 3 states. The volume escalated. In 2020, the first full year of the scheme, Pemberton stole approximately 40 checks. In 2021, the number climbed to 70. In 2022, it crossed 100. By the time investigators began their controlled surveillance in early 2023, the operation was averaging 2 to 3 stolen checks per week. The total take, eventually documented in the federal indictment, was approximately $940,000 across more than 200 stolen checks over 3 years. The signs were visible to anyone who knew where to look. Cheryl Pemberton stopped taking the cafeteria job back when it reopened in late 2020. The family bought a new base boat in 2021. They paid cash for it. Gus replaced his personal pickup in 2022 with a 4-door diesel model loaded with options. He told neighbors he had been doing well with side work, building deer stands and selling them at a small profit. The neighbors believed him because his side work was real. The deer stands existed. They just did not pay for a $40,000 truck. His co-workers at the post office noticed nothing. He kept his head down. He never bragged. He worked his route the same way he had worked it for 13 years. He still brought packages to the door when it rained. He still waved at the widows on the porch. They still waited for the LLV to round the bend. No one noticed. No one checked. Earl Tipton was 71 years old. He lived alone in a single-story cinder-block house on a county road that ran east out of the town of Soperton toward the Troitland County line. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a combat engineer with the 20th Engineer Brigade, and he received a monthly VA disability check of $1,847 connected to a service-related back injury and partial hearing loss. The check arrived in his mailbox on or about the first business day of every month. It had arrived that way for 31 years. In February of 2023, the check did not come. Earl waited a week, then called his local VA service office. They told him the check had been issued on schedule. They suggested he speak to the post office. He drove into Holland County the next morning and stood at the customer counter in the small lobby on Magnolia Street. The postmaster, a woman who had known Earl for 2 decades, told him she would put in a trace. She said these things sometimes happened. The check might turn up. It might have been delivered to the wrong box. She would call him. She did not call him. The trace produced nothing. In March of 2023, his second VA check failed to arrive. He walked back into the post office on Magnolia Street and asked again. He got the same answer. The postmaster told him she would put in another trace. She said she would speak to the carrier. She said she was sorry. Earl Tipton drove home and sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He thought about the 31 years of checks. He thought about the carrier, a man he had waved to from the porch 1,000 times. He thought about his wife, who had died of cancer 6 years earlier, and how she would have known what to do about this. Then he stood up and walked to the small writing desk in the living room and wrote a letter, by hand, to the Office of Inspector General of the United States Postal Service. His complaint was the 7th of its kind to arrive at the OIG's regional office in Atlanta within an 8-week period. The other 6 had come from elderly residents of Holland County and adjacent counties, all reporting missing federal benefit checks, all attached to addresses serviced by a single rural route running out of a single post office. The OIG opened a case file in late March of 2023. They assigned a special agent named Whitney Hargrove. She had been an OIG investigator for 9 years. She read the complaints in sequence, cross-referenced them against the route map, and saw what the local post office had not. The missing checks were not scattered. They were clustered. They were clustered along a single carrier's route, and the customers reporting them shared a demographic profile so specific it could not be coincidence. Therefore, the investigation that began with a single handwritten letter from a 71-year-old veteran was now a federal mail fraud case with a clear initial suspect. Special Agent Hargrove's investigation moved quietly through the spring of 2023. The first phase was passive. She pulled 3 years of complaint records from the Holland County Post Office and adjacent facilities, cross-referencing missing mail reports against route assignments. The pattern she had seen in the original 7 complaints repeated itself across the broader dataset. Reports of missing federal benefit checks on Pemberton's route were running between 3 and 5 times the rate of comparable rural routes in the district. The second phase was active. In May of 2023, the OIG initiated controlled mail testing on Pemberton's route. The procedure was straightforward. Marked envelopes containing test checks drawn on a federal investigative account were prepared with the same physical characteristics as ordinary outgoing mail. The envelopes were placed in the mailboxes of cooperating customers along Pemberton's route, with the red flags raised on dates and at times consistent with normal customer behavior. Each envelope was logged. Each was tracked by serial numbered indicators that would generate an alert when the test check was deposited or attempted to be deposited anywhere in the banking system. Between May and August of 2023, OIG investigators placed 23 test envelopes in outgoing mailboxes on Pemberton's route. Of those 23, 14 never arrived at their address destinations. 6 of the 14 were eventually flagged when associated test checks surfaced through deposit attempts at out-of-state credit unions. The accounts the test checks were deposited into traced back to identity documents maintained by Devin Maxwell. Maxwell was placed under separate surveillance. In September of 2023, Maxwell was arrested on an unrelated state warrant in Toombs County. Federal investigators interviewed him in the Toombs County Jail within 48 hours. By the end of the second interview, Maxwell had agreed to cooperate in exchange for sentencing consideration. He named Pemberton as the source of the stolen mail. He described the operation in detail, including the volume, the timeline, the cut structure, and the existence of the annotated route list Pemberton kept at his residence. Maxwell told investigators that Pemberton called the list, in conversation, "my book." On the morning of November 14, 2023, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants at Pemberton's home and on his personal pickup truck. The vehicle search recovered a black canvas tool bag containing 9 opened envelopes and 7 check-washing solvent bottles. The residence search recovered the smoking gun. In the second drawer of a tool cabinet in Pemberton's garage, agents found a manila folder. Inside the folder was a printed list of every household on his postal route, generated from a standard USPS carrier operational document. Beside the printed addresses, in Pemberton's handwriting, were small annotations: V and A, S, S and A, R and R. The single letter A, cross-referenced against the addresses of the customers whose checks had been reported missing. The annotations matched the targeting pattern exactly. Earl Tipton's address was on the list. Beside his name was a single letter A. We are about to walk into the confrontation, and then into the courtroom. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel does not skim past these stories. Subscribe and hit the bell. The sentence in this case is going to surprise you, and I want you to hear how the judge framed it. The morning of November 14th, 2023, was cold and overcast. Gus Pemberton was at his kitchen table when the first knock came. He was 48 years old, in a gray Postal Service polo shirt and dark blue work pants, drinking coffee from a mug that had a Holland County Volunteer Fire Department logo on the side. Cheryl was at the sink, rinsing a plate. 6 federal agents stood on the porch. Special Agent Hargrove was at the front. She held up a federal search warrant and identified herself. "Mr. Pemberton, I'm Special Agent Whitney Hargrove with the United States Postal Service Office of Inspector General. We have a search warrant for this residence and for your personal vehicle. I'm going to ask you to step outside with us while the search is conducted." "What is this about?" "Sir, you understand what this is about. We need you to step outside." Pemberton set his coffee mug down. Cheryl had stopped at the sink with the plate in her hand. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not say anything. Then he stood up and walked to the front door. 2 agents escorted him to the front porch and asked him to sit on the wooden bench beside the door. They read him his rights. He nodded once. He did not speak. The search took 3 hours. Agents went through the house, the garage, the tool shed, and the base boat parked under a tarp behind the house. When the lead agent emerged from the garage carrying the manila folder, he held it up so Hargrove could see it from the porch. She nodded. Hargrove walked over to the bench and sat down beside Pemberton. She placed the folder on her lap without opening it. "Mr. Pemberton, I want to give you a chance to talk to me before we go any further. We have the list." "What list?" "The one in the manila folder in the second drawer of the tool cabinet in your garage. The one with the handwritten annotations. We've cross-referenced it. We know what the letters mean." Pemberton stared at the floor of the porch for a long time. The breath went out of him in a slow, audible exhale. "I want a lawyer." He did not say anything else. Those were the last words he spoke to federal agents before he was placed in handcuffs and transported to the Holland County Detention Facility for transfer to federal custody. Cheryl watched from the front window. She was still holding the plate. A federal grand jury in the Southern District of Georgia returned a sealed indictment against Gus Pemberton on December 6, 2023. The indictment charged him with theft of mail by a postal employee under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1709, bank fraud under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1344, aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1028A, and conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 371. The indictment ran to 41 counts. Pemberton retained a Savannah-based defense attorney named Robert Holloway. Holloway had handled federal white-collar cases in the Southern District for more than 20 years. He met with Pemberton 3 times in the federal detention center in Atlanta before recommending a plea agreement. The evidence was overwhelming. The annotated route list, the recovered envelopes, the cooperating co-conspirator, the controlled mail test results, and the lifestyle financial evidence formed a chain that defense motions could not break. Holloway told Pemberton there was no version of trial that ended in acquittal. There was only a version that ended in a longer sentence. Pemberton pleaded guilty in March of 2024. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for June 18th in the federal courthouse in Savannah. 23 victims attended the hearing. Earl Tipton was the first to speak. He walked to the lectern slowly, holding a folded sheet of yellow legal paper. He was 72 years old. He read from the paper in a voice that did not waver. "I served 2 tours in Vietnam," he said. "I came home and I went to work and I paid my bills, and I never asked the government for anything I had not earned. When my disability check stopped arriving, I thought maybe I had done something wrong. I thought maybe I had filled out a form incorrectly. I sat at my kitchen table for 2 months wondering what I had done. I am told the man who took my checks had a piece of paper with my name on it and a letter beside it that meant I lived alone. I want him to know that I lived alone because my wife died, not because nobody loved me. I want him to know that I waved at him from my porch every month for 13 years. I want him to know I waved because I thought he was a decent man. I do not know what else to say." Earl Tipton folded the paper and walked back to his seat. The courtroom was silent. 3 other victims spoke. A widow from Persimmon Lane, a railroad retiree whose pension check had been intercepted twice, the adult daughter of a customer who had died during the period of the thefts. Each statement was specific. Each statement carried the same weight. Judge Mary Beth Calloway delivered her sentence on the afternoon of June 18th, 2024. She addressed Pemberton directly from the bench. She said the following: "Mr. Pemberton, what you did was not theft in the ordinary sense. You were not a man who picked a pocket. You were a public employee who studied the people who trusted you, who learned which of them lived alone, and who used that knowledge against them. The list found in your garage is not a record of crimes. It is a record of how you thought about the people on your route. You categorized them. You annotated them. You selected the ones least likely to fight back. The fact that you knew them by name when you targeted them is what distinguishes this case from ordinary mail theft. I have considered the federal sentencing guidelines. I have considered the victim impact statements. I have considered your 17 years of service prior to the conduct charged in this indictment. I find that the conduct outweighs the service." The judge sentenced Pemberton to 72 months in federal prison. She ordered restitution in the full amount of $940,000. She entered an order permanently barring him from federal employment. He was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution at Jessup, Georgia,